afternoon, everyone, or good morning. We're just going to give it 2 minutes before we get started here, just to let people get logged on and signed in. I'm starting soon. Okay, hi everyone. We're going to get started. I think you have a pretty good crew here. There might still be people coming in, but I wanted to welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Anna McLaughlin. I'm the Program Director for Transportation Program Management with AASHTO. I'd like to welcome you all to webinar 67 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO. We're very excited. We have a great lineup for you all today with speakers from FHWA, Iowa State University, Gordon Proctor Associates, and Starisis Corporation, sharing research on how pavement and bridge conditions can contribute to system performance areas such as highway safety, freight mobility, or reliability. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months, going back to 2012, on a variety of topics in asset management. For more information on this webinar series, you can visit our TAM portal, tam-portal.com. That's TAM-portal.com. From there, you can click on events in the main menu to register for any of our future webinars. You'll also find archives of previous webinars, and links to videos and slides from today's webinar will be posted on this site. The TAM portal is a home, excuse me. The TAM portal is home of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. For more information on the subcommittee, you can visit the portal, tam-portal.com, and click on Subcommittee on Asset Management under the Community menu. If you have suggestions on future webinar topics, we would love to hear them. Or if you have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, you can please put those your comments or questions using the webinar's chat feature. We will answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. At that time, we'll invite audience members to unmute and share their comments during the group discussion session at the end. Until then, we hope you'll be careful to keep your audio connection muted. If you haven't already, please be sure to mute your audio so that the presenters are not interrupted. Thank you, that's much appreciated. And I think that covers it for logistics today. I'm going to now turn it over to Tasha Clemens from FHWA. Hi, Tasha.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone joining us today. I am Tasha Clemens, and I represent the Transportation Asset Performance Team in the Office of Infrastructure at Federal Highway Administration here in Washington, D.C. Federal Highways, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. We feel it's a great way to bring people together around a series of important topics and to connect with the asset management community. We have a great team of speakers on the agenda today who will share highlights of their research on how pavement and bridge conditions affects transportation system performance. With this webinar, as Anna has said, we have reached the 67th webinar in our series. So FHWA's Transportation Asset Performance Team is committed to increasing knowledge and capabilities at transportation agencies across the U.S. So I would encourage you to visit us online for more information and to gain access to available resources. As you can see, the address is shown on the screen. And finally, I just want to say thank you for your participation. You will enjoy today's presentation. And so now I would like to turn it over to Hyana Park of SpyPun Partners to give an overview of today's webinar, to review today's agenda, and to introduce our speakers. Hyana?
Thank you, Tasha. I'm Hyana Park with SpyPun Partners. And as Anna mentioned previously, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are to first highlight how pavement and bridge conditions can contribute to system performance areas such as highway safety, freight mobility, or reliability. This is a special TAM webinar in that we're having the Federal Highway Office of Operations research project share the results of that project. You'll learn about the work completed for this office and conducted by Iowa State University, Gordon Proctor Associates, and Starisis Corporation. We'll also review how other attributes such as pavement shoulders, pavement friction, or bridge conditions contribute to highway safety, freight movement, noise reduction, and transportation system resilience. And of course, in the mantra we say in the webinar, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. For the agenda today, we started off by hearing from Anna McLaughlin and Tasha Clemens. Our main presentation speakers today will be first Joe Gregory, who is with the Federal Highways Office of Operations, where he leads initiatives related to transportation system management and operations, also known as TISMO, and asset management for operations. Having previously worked in the FHWA Office of Asset Management, Joe brings his experience to the operations community to apply asset management principles to traffic assets such as signals and ITS. Dr. Omar Smadi is a professor of transportation engineering at the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering at Iowa State University, where he's also the director of the Center for Transportation Research and Education. Next, we have Gordon Proctor, who for the past 15 years has served the Federal Highway Administration, TRB, and state departments of transportation, primarily in risk and asset management. Before that, during his 15-year career at Ohio Department of Transportation, he was the Deputy Director for Planning, Chief of Staff, and then the Director. Shobna Varma is the President of Starisis Corporation and the former Deputy Director and Chief Information Officer at the Ohio Department of Transportation. She's authored or co-authored many reports on transportation asset and risk management topics. While at the Ohio DOT, she catalyzed business process improvements and developed key asset management and other transportation applications that improve decision-making and help the DOT become a frequent Baldrige Award winner. So we're planning to have an open group discussion at the end, and we'll start after the presentations are finished. We will go through a Q&A session. So as you're listening to the presenters, if you have a comment or a question, please use the Zoom's chat feature, and then we'll go in the order that they've been entered at first, and then open it up for a dialogue at the end of the webinar. The slides and video will be available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. And now I'll turn it over to our speakers, and let's begin with Joe.
Great, thanks so much. Again, thank you for having me on today. I really enjoy the opportunity just to share with various groups what we're doing in the Office of Operations, whether it be tied to asset management, TSMO, or other things. So we definitely appreciate the opportunity here. So today, it's already been mentioned, we want to really dive deep into a publication we recently released, How Pavement and Bridge Conditions Affect Transportation System Performance. So next slide. Can we advance? Oh, yeah. So this is just a standard disclaimer. I'm sure maybe you've already seen in USDOT presentations about how we are not going to endorse a specific product or manufacturer or try to appear to show a preference toward any product or entity. The idea is for informational purposes, and then anything outside of statutes and regulations, it doesn't have that force of or effect of law or binding. So next slide. So again, this document was recently released in the past couple of weeks. It's on the FHWA Asset Management for Operations website. Next slide. And just to give you a little background of our thinking, and as we started this project, some of y'all may remember a former FHWA colleague, Steve Gay, who was the team leader in asset management until he retired a couple of years ago. He and I talked quite a bit about various opportunities to connect operations and asset management. And one idea that he brought up was the CFR regulation in terms of how the asset management plan needs to not only improve asset conditions or the state of good repair, but also improve system performance in terms of the safety and efficiency of the highway system. And when we looked at the initial rounds of TAMs, there's varying degrees of detail, and the more we started talking about it, the more we decided it'd be good to just continue that dialogue or to further that dialogue and try to develop a resource for state DOTs as they're continuing to update and improve and implement their TAMs. So this focus here is making sure that we tie those asset conditions, specifically pavements and bridges, since those are required by the TAMs on the NHS, to system performance. So that's the background behind this particular project. And with that, I will turn it over to Omar.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody joining us today. I want to start first by thanking Federal Highway and AASHTO for sponsoring the webinar and to allow us to share the project results and a summary of the project findings today. So as Joe said, the report is available on FHWA website, so I would encourage all of you to look at the report. The report has a lot of areas that are covered in it that we don't have enough time to cover in the webinar. So that's, again, why I would encourage you to read the report. But in today's webinar, we're going to focus on three important themes. The first one is good pavement and bridge conditions not only contribute to condition performance measures, but they also contribute to good performance in areas such as safety, freight movement, resilience, and quality of life. For example, good pavement conditions contribute to highway safety, especially when we look at friction and shoulder considerations. So when we look at those two, there's definitely positive contributions when those are addressed. When we look at bridges, for example, that are scour resistance, those bridges can be more resilient. That would help us in terms of freight movement and would help us in areas where there is congestion. When urban pavements are reconstructed or rehabilitated, that gives the agencies an opportunity to provide complete streets and also active transportation. So those are really aspects that impact the quality of life, and they're not just pavement and bridge condition related. The second aspect of that we want to focus on is, as part of the TAM guidance, state DOTs define their own state of good repair. And that could be holistically looked at, not just in terms of pavement and bridge condition, but it could be looked at as the linkage between pavement and bridge conditions and their contribution to other performance measures like safety, resilience, quality of life, and other objectives. And then the third thing is the transportation asset management plan process itself can be a vehicle to coordinate the linking of condition and performance. A pavement program, for example, budget may not be adequate to address all of those needs. So trade-off analysis between the different programs, whether they contribute to condition or contribute to other performance measures, become a critical task that we can coordinate as part of the TAM process. So those are the three main themes that we want to address in today's webinar. The organization of the report has basically 9 chapters. The first 8 chapters examine one area of the linkage between asset condition and performance. 7 of them are really related to pavements and bridges. The 8th one has to do with drainage. Even though that is not part of of course, pavements and bridges, but drainage has a huge impact on the quality of our pavements and on the health of our bridges. So that's why we included drainage as one chapter there. And then the last chapter basically discusses how each section of the asset management plan can link to other performance areas to strengthen that process and to maximize the effectiveness of the decisions that we're trying to make. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Gordon for chapter 1, the linking of the TAM to system performance objectives. Gordon?
All right, thank you, Omar. Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Joe and Omar said, is that a main message of this report is that the asset management plan can be that vehicle for identifying and accentuating the links between managing assets in good condition and achieving other objectives, such as for safety, freight mobility, resilience, active transportation. And it even gets into some things that are not in the planning process, but are related to it, such as improving the quality of life through reducing the noise, improving water quality, increasing the availability of active transportation. So the report gets into this in quite a bit of detail. If we could get the next slide, please. The report in the first chapter emphasizes the many places where the asset management regulation emphasizes a focus upon both performance as well as a focus upon condition. And the report makes some other references outside of the asset management regulation into the performance and planning regulations as well. And it's never good just to read a slide, but we really want to bring your attention to a couple of things here that I know we've all read at one time, but may not have fully appreciated. And that while the state must develop an asset management plan to describe how the NHS will be managed, and look at what's in italics there, to achieve system performance effectiveness and state DOT targets for asset conditions. So this is just one place of many where the emphasis upon performance is accentuated, in addition to the emphasis of using the asset management plan and a performance-based planning and programming process to tie together condition and performance. In 23 CFR 515.5, when they describe, we say, well, we want to emphasize performance. Well, what is performance? Well, as defined in the asset management definition as part of the regulation, is that performance of the NHS refers to the effectiveness of the NHS in providing for safe and efficient movement of people and goods, where that performance can be affected by physical assets. Later in the presentation, Omar and Shobana will talk in some length about these connections. But say, for instance, your strategic highway safety plan has a focus upon runoff the roadway crashes. Well, that could influence your pavement investment strategies by enhancing shoulders and friction on curves. If your strategic highway safety program has a focus upon pedestrian crashes, and maybe pavement friction and mid-block crossings and at intersections becomes very important. We were in a state recently that had 30 or 40 NHS bridges without adequate vertical clearance. Well, that could be a freight impediment, which could influence the asset management plan. So the report really sort of highlights some of these connections here between condition and performance. And the first chapter starts off by reiterating where those connections between performance and conditions are emphasized in the regulation. We could have the next slide, please. In one of the definitions of performance gap, we want to draw your attention to what the gap is. It doesn't say condition gap, it says performance gap. And that's a gap between the current condition of the asset and its target, as well as gaps in system performance effectiveness that are best addressed by improving physical assets. So just as I mentioned about friction and shoulder conditions, or bridges without adequate clearance, or bridges that are load limited that could impede freight mobility, all those could be performance gaps. They're gaps in the condition of the asset, but they're also gaps that affect the performance of other performance areas, such as freight mobility, congestion, resilience, or safety. And then in the regulation regarding, or the language regarding asset investment strategies, there's three things in it that really emphasize performance. That the investment strategy is supposed to make or support progress towards improving the condition of assets and the performance of the NHS. That is supposed to help achieve targets for asset conditions and targets for performance of the NHS. And as you know, there are targets beyond just bridge and pavement conditions. And most broadly of all, that the asset management strategy, investment strategies, are to make progress towards achieving the national goals, and those are quite broad. And they involve safety, infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement, environmental sustainability, and reduced project delivery delays. So when we think about what the investment strategy should focus on in terms of performance, it's quite broad in terms of what types of performance they can contribute to. We can get the next slide, please. I want to draw your attention to something that was in one of the Q&As about the asset management plan. This came out a couple of years ago, but I want to really draw your attention to the second sentence here, which says that under this provision, state DOTs must address instances where the results or recommendations from other plans, including the strategic highway safety plan, freight plan, may have an effect on NHS bridge and pavement assets. This could occur if the recommendations from the other plans call for additions or changes to the existing pavement, bridges, or other physical assets. So again, to reiterate the example of shoulder conditions, if the strategic highway safety plan recognizes roadway departure crashes as a priority, and they tend to be, that could have a bearing on the pavement investment strategies and how to integrate the pavement program and the pavement investment strategies to integrate with the safety, the high strategic highway safety program, to improve both pavement performance and safety performance. So the report gets into quite a few examples that Omar and Shobana will discuss in more detail about the linkages between condition and performance. If we could have the next slide. And the final thing that Omar touched on, the final part of my presentation and here in this first part of the slide deck, is to talk about the state of good repair. In the preamble to the asset management regulation, Federal Highway emphasized that it leaves the definition of state of good repair up to every state. It didn't decide what the state of good repair is. And so the state of good repair is not limited only to the state performance targets as set out in the federal pavement and bridge measures. The good repair could be defined as a condition that supports multiple performance objectives. For instance, our bridge state of good repair could define that we're intended to not only maintain bridge conditions, but encourage and enhance freight mobility. We could say with our drainage program that we want to not only meet water quality standards and drainage standards, but we want to make sure our drainage assets keep water off the road, which can reduce crashes and help us achieve water quality standards. So one of the things the report emphasizes is that you have broad latitude in defining the state of road repair. And because of that, it increases the opportunity to link the consideration of pavement condition and bridge conditions with other system performance. So with that, I'll turn it back to Omar to talk about safety and pavement conditions.
Thank you, Gordon. So our chapter 2 really is the linkage between pavement and bridges and safety. As all of you or most of you know, the pavement performance measures include the IRI, the International Roughness Index, percent cracking, rutting on asphalt pavements, and faulting on concrete. When we looked at the research, to prepare for this document, the relationship between IRI and safety is mixed. There is some research that says smoother roads provide for a safer driving environment, but there is also research that suggests that smoother roads increase speed, which in turn is negatively impacting safety. So the research there is really mixed. When we look at rutting, there is this direct relationship between rutting and hydro planning, especially for deeper ruts that are extended over a longer length across our highway segments at higher speed. So there's definitely a relationship there in terms of rutting and safety. But where it's really important is when we're talking about good pavement influencing good system performance is with pavement friction. Even though pavement friction is not part of the federal performance measures, it is an important factor that could influence both pavement management decisions and strategies to reduce crashes. So the pavement friction and safety have long been linked in terms of improving safety. So that is one of the key things that we want the audience today to relate to. Federal Highway has noted a critical connection between pavement friction and safety and recommending strategies like high friction surface treatments as part of a strategy to improve pavement condition and at the same time improving safety. The report emphasizes this linkage between pavement investment strategies and also strategies to reduce crashes through improved pavement friction. So the report really suggests that the state DOTs could use the TAM development process as a means to develop life cycle strategies for managing pavements, while at the same time complementing the Strategic Highway Safety Plan and also the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the HSIP, to coordinate the activities between managing a physical asset like the pavement and managing the performance in terms of safety. So pavement friction really influences crashes, particularly at curves where crashes are overrepresented, at intersections, and also pedestrian crosswalks. The second one is in terms of friction and pedestrian safety. So pavement friction has a critical impact on pedestrian safety at crosswalks, at intersections, in densely populated areas, and environmental justice communities where we have more pedestrians, we have more users using public transportation and having to walk and cross our streets. So when state DOTs coordinate their TAMPs, we really want them to coordinate the TAMP with the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, with regional transportation plans, and they could find this nexus basically between their pavement programs, pedestrian safety, and environmental justice. So that's the linkage that we're trying to coordinate through this program. So we could have the high value of improved skid resistance at pedestrian crossings provide this opportunity for the pavement program and the safety program to coordinate for maximum benefits. And we hear a lot today, these days, about vulnerable road users. Those are pedestrians and cyclists. And each DOT had to develop a vulnerable road user plan in terms of reducing the number of fatalities and injuries for those vulnerable users. So pavement friction provides an alternative to deal with that. So it doesn't just, it's not just friction. We can also talk about shoulders. Funding adequate pavement shoulders provides another benefit to both the condition of the pavement and also the performance in terms of safety. There's a shoulder treatment, the safety edge, which basically allows the drivers to recover if they run off the road without losing control. That has a huge impact in terms of safety. So a statewide effort to improve and maintain shoulders would require additional funding or changes in the way we develop our design standards. But that additional cost of the shoulder improvement could be considered during our pavement investment strategy process when updating the TAM because of the safety benefits that it provides. So the research, as I said, again, sometimes is mixed and nuanced. So we really have to dig deep and we have to do detailed analysis. But part of this process is to be able to link pavement management and safety. We need collaboration and coordination between the TAMP staff developing the TAMP, the pavement managers who are responsible for the management of that physical asset, and the safety expert. The TAM process is only one vehicle for that such collaboration where the TAMP can help state DOT staff in terms of collaboration across programs to link pavement condition and safety, coordinate funding between the safety program and the pavement program to maximize the outcome of both programs, and then document the state DOT holistic approach, ensuring pavement conditions support safety objectives. So, and some state DOTs might have to do their own data analysis, but there are a lot of resources in terms of the impact of some of the items we talked about, like friction and shoulder, that are documented in the report. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Shabna.
Thank you, Omar. So what I will be covering is some of the information already covered by Gordon and by Omar, but I will delve a little bit more deeply into chapters 3 through chapter 8. There's a lot of information to cover, so I'll give some highlights. So one of the things that this chapter 3 discusses is how good condition pavements create multiple secondary benefits. So pavements do create a lot of secondary benefits. Among them, what we talk about is lower vehicle operating costs and less noise. This has been researched quite a bit, and there are national NCHRP reports that talk about how tripling the IRI from 63 to 190 increases the fuel consumption by almost 4.8%. Similarly, there are reports that talk about how continued increase of IRI also results in higher costs in repair and maintenance of vehicles. So those are important secondary aspects that one needs to consider when discussing pavements. In the context of IRI, what the World Health Organization they have linked is that there's the largest source of sleep disturbance and annoyance, they note, is because of this excessive highway noise. And it is also a big factor contributing to lower property values. These are important aspects. So even though the TAMP is not require a state DOT to look at pavement noise and some of these other factors, it's good to understand that pavements in good condition do provide additional benefits. They lower operating costs, they lower noise, and they possibly increase property value. And these are some of the things that DOTs have an opportunity to share with the public as they're developing their asset management plans. Next slide, please. And even though there is some research, but there's not a lot of research, which talks about bridge linkage to performance as there is with pavements. Irrespective, good pavement bridge conditions are essential to a high-performing transportation system. As the slide notes, structures can contribute to freight mobility, when they accommodate superloads and they're not load limited. Bridges can support mobility when they have the width to accommodate needs for transit services, active transportation, or they have sufficient travel lanes. So bridges can also enhance communities when they incorporate aesthetics, historic elements reflecting their surroundings. And as you drive around the country, you will see many states have done so. They have incorporated historic elements and their aesthetics pertaining to their bridges. Because of the long life cycle of bridges, a relatively small percentage of them get reconstructed or replaced annually. So it's most likely that during the reconstruction and replacement, it provides a great opportunity to state DOTs and to MPOs and to cities to add bike lanes, integrate the bridges into complete streets, and ensure that bridge enhances the appearance of the surrounding. Also, understanding the fact that bridges have a long life cycle plan, it provides an opportunity to link TAM's bridge strategies, long-term bridge preservation and maintenance strategies, asset management strategies of bridges, with congestion relief, freight mobility, or expanding active transportation opportunities. So, for example, FHWA in one of its reports has listed that the top 100 interstate system bottlenecks include many large bridges at river crossings and interchanges. So as state DOTs and MPOs plan to improve these bridges, there's an opportunity to link it with the planning to satisfy not just bridge condition objectives, but also alleviate congestion, ensure that freight movement, and they also complement active transportation systems. Similar to congestion, two trends overlap the bridge life cycle. One is bridges on the National Highway Freight Network are aging. In a report to Congress, FHWA noted that nearly 31.5% of bridges on the National Highway Freight Network are 51 years or older. And more than about 53% are between 26 and 50 years old. So this provides an opportunity because in the decades ahead, state DOTs will be considering life cycle investment for structures. And as they do life cycle investment for structures, it provides an opportunity to also consider how the structures can complement safety, freight mobility, and other considerations. Keeping in mind that the National Freight Strategic Plan emphasized that addressing the national highway freight needs involves complex transportation planning issues, particularly in urbanized areas. So among those issues is how to maintain bridge conditions while also supporting mobility, safety, and community livability. So the point we come back to is, as state DOTs develop life cycle plans for these important structures, they have the opportunity to link the state freight plan, the TAM, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, bring it all together and address multiple of these challenges that we just talked about. FHWA guidance on state plans and state advisory committees note that the freight plans are only required to have an 8-year horizon. However, FHWA suggests, because of the longer life cycle planning process for bridges and the life of these longer lived assets, to extend the horizon to provide additional opportunities for linking asset management and freight and congestion mitigation strategies. So FHWA has stated that 8-year horizon may not be the appropriate time to resolve all these problems and to have projects in the pipeline. So they're suggesting that a horizon of probably 20 years allows for increased linkage with asset management lifecycle strategies for pavements and bridges with a long range of transportation planning. Next slide, please. Chapter 5, as I mentioned earlier, discusses a lot of things. One of the things it discusses is the link between asset conditions, asset resilience, and performance. In some cases, we know that asset condition per se may not affect resilience. For example, a pavement's IRI or a bridge's deck condition has may have little influence on a roadway flood resilience. In other cases, conditions and resilience may be closely linked. Asset management lifecycle planning process provides regular milestones for assessing asset conditions and considering their resilience. We talked about state of good repair earlier on in this presentation. So connection between the state of good repair and resilience occurs in many ways, but at least in two ways that are of pertinent to this conversation. First, some assets in good conditions may be more resilient. An example could be a culvert. If a culvert is well maintained and is functioning and is designed appropriately, it can perform as it's intended or expected to perform. Second, asset rehabilitation and replacement cycles provide DOTs an opportunity to incorporate resilient design elements. So lifecycle planning that involves timely application, as you know, of the different work types, which is timely application of preservation, maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction in order to extend the life of the asset. So each of these phases, when treatments are done or plans are put in place, provide state DOTs and MPOs and others an opportunity to consider if treatments could enhance the asset resilience. So Chapter 5 lists several ways in which good conditions can be more resilient. It provides an opportunity to talk about how assets in good condition can be more resilient. One of the obvious ways is with bridges which have good scour condition or drainage assets that can handle storm events, or bridges that have been seismically retrofitted. So all of these do provide that resilience opportunity. Some research shows that rising sea levels affect water tables and can influence pavement performance considerably away from the shorelines. So Chapter 5 suggests that multiple disciplinary teams, climate experts, asset managers, all could collaborate to identify how assets in good condition can pay benefits to enhance system resilience. So the chapter notes that each state's challenge is different. Each state is experiencing different climate events. And so states experts understand the state's assets and the changing climate, and they could provide insight into how assets management treatments can also enhance resilience. Next slide, please. So we talked about earlier how the state of good repair, the definition of a state of good repair. The definition of a state of good repair, and as stated in the law, in the regulation, and also the point about what is the federal performance measure as discussed in 23 USC 150 is really talking about, bridge and pavement conditions. However, and it lacks the conversation about, a state of good repair that supports system performance. So, but the point is states do have an opportunity to set what they believe for their particular state is a state of good repair. And what we find is that more and more states are incorporating resilience as one of the big concerns, and they are reflecting this pavement and bridge vulnerability to extreme weather as a consideration for state of good repair. So the point being, like a state like Washington, which has a lot of seismic activity and they have a lot of bridges that needed to be retrofitted, they have a plan in place. So if a bridge is in a seismically active area and has not been retrofitted, a state DOT could consider it to be not in a state of good repair, irrespective of the specifics of the pavement and bridge conditions. So its conditions may not support the performance of highway system to move people and goods. And even though a bridge might be in a fair condition, as stated under the NBI, the National Bridge Inspection Standards, it may still be a factor that a state can consider as it's developing what it thinks is the state of good repair. Similarly, how scour conditions could reflect a state DOT's concern, and it could be incorporated into the state of good repair definition. So similar examples relate to how flood prone a pavement section is, or whether a drainage asset along a pavement is adequate to ensure long-term pavement performance, or to reduce safety risk caused by ponding and hydroplaning that Omar talked about a few slides earlier. So the point is, if a state DOT or an MPO thinks more broadly about how the condition of the state's condition state of assets affect the performance of a transportation system, they can actually broaden their definition of state of good repair. And so all of the attributes of payments may not be reflected in how they define a payment good condition, but you can consider beyond the decks and beyond the superstructures and substructures for pavement, and similarly the different distresses that go into computation of good and fair as a state is developing its state of good repair, and all of those factors can be incorporated into their objectives. Next slide, please. In chapter 6, we talk about drainage and the state of good repair. So as we've seen that in the last 2032 TAM, that almost 40% of the state DOTs had a whole host of other assets besides pavements and bridges that they had included in the asset management plan. And what we're finding is states are increasingly including drainage assets in their TAMs and in their asset management efforts. So they're increasingly recognizing that the critical path to long-term performance of the pavements, safety, and environmental enhancements may well include having good drainage systems and in good drainage assets in good condition. So the control or lack of control of water affects long-term pavement performance, safety, and water quality. Excess amount of water, we talked about a few slides earlier, excess amount of water can contribute to hydroplaning and even sweeping vehicles off roadways, which we saw in some of these climate change impact, like flooding and excessive precipitation in the states in the last year or two. Water quality is affected by how slowly water drains from the roadways. So long-term pavement preservation long-term pavement performance is therefore influenced by the control of water in the pavement structure. So in that context and many others, the inclusion of drainage assets in asset management plans provides another opportunity to coordinate efforts to improve asset conditions, safety, and resilience strategy. Next slide, please. We talked earlier about complete streets. So when using life cycle planning, which is the strategic approach that states DOTs are using when they manage when they develop plans to manage these long-lived assets and other assets, state DOTs periodically will come up with rehabilitation, reconstruction of urban pavements and bridges, along with what they're doing with the interstates and NHS. So when urban pavements are reconstructed, projects often replace pavement bases, underground utilities, rebuild drainage, including curbs and gutters. So for an individual roadway segment, these types of projects may occur only once in 30 to 50 years, right? So, however, with thousands of urban lane miles, state DOTs may be involved in several such projects annually, providing an opportunity again here. So these urban reconstruction projects provide that opportunity for coordinating complete street projects with pavement and bridge reconstruction. Complete street projects support multiple performance objectives, including enhancing bicyclists and pedestrian safety, supporting active transportation, supporting transit, and complementing MPO objectives. So these projects really provide the least cost opportunities for adding sidewalks, bike paths, streetscaping, and other attributes. The pavement reconstruction project already, as you know, includes costs for contractor mobilization, maintenance of traffic, and drainage repairs. So opportunities exist to cost share with transit, with safety, and other programs to implement complete streets concepts with such reconstruction projects. So when considering how long-term pavement conditions affect overall system performance, a state DOT could evaluate the following to achieve agency mission, support the national goals, and deliver needed pavement reconstruction projects. So you think about, do urban pavement rehabilitation and reconstruction projects provide an opportunity to reduce bicyclist and pavement crashes by including medians, pedestrian islands, and other features? Can the transit and active transportation opportunities be enhanced with project elements? Can the urban environment be enhanced by the appearance of colors, textures, and other features, and can they be included in the reconstruction project to support the agency's quality of life objectives? So although many complete street design decisions will be made at the project level, it is important to have policy and investment strategies to support complete street because it requires program-wide policies and funding. So the TAMP, as you know, it's 8 components, one of which is the investment strategies. The TAMP's pavement investment strategies could include funding to contribute to these projects when they occur during the 10 years of the TAMP horizon. Pavement reconstruction projects represent an opportunity for a nexus of objectives regarding pavement lifecycle planning, safety, livability, and linking pavement programs to MPO objectives. So there are a lot of opportunities during the TAMP development process to bring into consideration these other costs, other transportation asset management related investments that could benefit a state. Next slide, please. So conditions and reliability. In Chapter 8, we talk extensively about conditions and reliability. So although it seems intuitive that conditions, particularly pavement conditions, could affect travel speeds or reliability, as Omar said earlier on, a literature review for this particular report did not produce evidence of links between pavement and bridge condition and reliability. There was some research found correlations between the pavement condition and travel speed, but the results were really mixed. So what is becoming common is for state DOTs to apply asset management practices to assets for transportation system management and operation or TISMO, right? So noted in the research literature about asset management in TISMO is that these TISMO assets include many complex electronics and software components, all of which require different life cycle strategies. Each agency may have different components from different manufacturers of different age, all of which requires the agency to manage these individual components extensively. So to help, and we had done a project many years back with Nevada DOT where we were looking at their TISMO assets, and we found the thing that I just talked about, different assets with different components from different manufacturers, all necessitating very detailed management of this. So this is the challenge that states are facing. And to help states keep these TISMO assets in good repair and to support mobility and reliability, FHWA has produced 2 reports. One as a primer on applying transportation asset management to ITS assets. And the other is on applying it to traffic signals, just to help make this come together. And the primers are structured around 5 emerging themes in ITS and traffic signal asset management in line with the TAMP requirement. Next slide, please. So this slide just talks about how you manage assets. And very similarly, the big picture is very similar to what we do with all of our assets, right? The big theme is you do asset identification, then you develop how to manage these assets, what are the performance metrics and what are the targets that one need to put in place, and how do you maximize performance? And in the end, how do you think about what are the kinds of resources that have to be put in place in order to cost effectively manage them? So although the research literature did not find a link between bridge and pavement asset management strategies and reliability, the application of asset management to TISMO can be effective strategies to support reliability, right? It plays a big role in ensuring reliability of our transportation system. So asset management really can help state DOTs identify the investment strategies to keep TISMO assets in a state of good repair. And there are states that are beginning to think about or maturing in their approach to managing TISMO assets. For additional details on these 2 primers that we talked about, it's there on the FHWA website, and we could post this for you. With that, I'll turn this back over to Gordon.
Yeah, thank you, Shobhan. I appreciate it. Okay, well, in the next section here, we're going to talk. The next section here, we're going to talk about how the asset management plan can interact with the other performance-based plans, such as the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the Freight Plan, and the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Long Range Statewide Plan. Each update of these plans provides an opportunity to link them together and to identify the cross-cutting issues that they need to collaborate on. We probably can't solve all of our safety problems just with the safety program, or all of our bridge problems only through the bridge program. These programs intersect and affect one another. So Chapter 9 describes how the TAMP development process can provide an opportunity to coordinate with these other plans. Some of the things that we've talked about today may well cost more money, and the TAMP could well be the place to make the trade-offs between enhancing conditions and enhancing performance. As Omar talked about in a lot of the pavement treatments, some of them improved friction and some didn't. It requires a very nuanced approach to understand in your state which type of treatment at which type of location will actually enhance these performance and safety performance because of higher friction values. Those trade-offs and decisions about how to make those kind of coordinated decisions and those difficult nuanced decisions could occur in the asset management plan development process. And our report goes in some length to try to document where these trade-offs need to be made and how nuanced these decisions can be. And the report emphasizes that the asset management plan development process can be linked to the update of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the Freight Plan, the Metropolitan Plan, the Long Range Plan, congestion strategies, and resilience strategies to make sure that those connections get made. If we can get the next slide, please. The asset management plan itself doesn't necessarily require you to reach out to these other stakeholders, but the plan, the report that we've developed really emphasizes that we should. In the preamble to the asset management rule, it said that the minimum thing you could do is just the asset management program managers could review other performance plans and take into consideration their objectives. Well, that might be the minimum thing one could do. What our report recommends is to form multidisciplinary groups. So we're getting input from safety, freight, resilience, drainage, geotechnical asset management, all of our different stakeholders as we develop the asset management plan. So we get their inputs, and concurrently, the TAMP staff could participate in the development of those other plans. There's probably real synergy between the pavement management staff and the people who are concerned about pavement friction at intersections and crosswalks and curves, collaborating and making sure that both the Strategic Highway Safety Plan and the Asset Management Plan are taking care of all the opportunities that exist to jointly achieve those objectives. So the Asset Management Plan is an opportunity to update those considerations and to look at the stakeholders and to build bridges through these other plans and programs. Next slide, please. One of the things the report emphasizes is how each section of the asset management plan could contribute to performance in multiple areas. For example, our objectives, our measures, and targets could support multiple performance areas. We could have objectives and measures and targets that say we want to make sure our pavement program enhances safety, or that our bridge program enhances freight movement, or that our drainage plan and our drainage program enhances water quality. So we have the ability, when we define our objectives, measures, and targets in our asset management plan, to think broadly and think about achieving these other objectives. The summary listing of pavements and bridges could cite the assets that are most problematic. Or again, if we have hundreds of miles of rural road that lack shoulders, and we think shoulders are important, the summary listing of assets could note that, because that later then could feed into the gap analysis and preferably eventually into the investment strategies. So the summary listing of assets could come back and note how many bridges are load limited on the NHS that may be a freight impediment, and how can we address that later when we get to our investment strategies. the performance gaps could identify what are all the gaps out there that are in our gaps in our physical condition that could affect our performance of our transportation system. So we can think a little more broadly about what a performance gap is. It may not just be a gap between our condition level and our target. So we get the next slide. Our life cycle plans could indicate that when we are reconstructing pavements or bridges, just as Shobana discussed, how we might be able to incorporate multiple objectives into those. Right now in Cincinnati, Ohio's pursuing with Kentucky the largest project in our state history, the Brett Spence Bridge on I-75 across the Ohio River. Structurally, the bridge is not in poor condition. So in terms of an asset management performance measure, that bridge is not poor, doesn't contribute to a problem in terms of condition, but it fails to meet multiple performance objectives, contributes to congestion, and it has safety problems. It's a real constraint to freight. So as we develop a life cycle plan for that bridge, we're considering multiple performance objectives. Now you may say, well, that's a project level decision, but as Shobana noted with the National Freight Network, we're going to be making those decisions multiple times over the decade. So maybe we should address that in our asset management plan. It says, we develop life cycle plans for pavements and bridges. Let's be sure at that point to consider how that life cycle plan for that asset should enhance safety, mobility, freight movement, and so on. The risk analysis could note how these conditions create risk to performance, such as poor drainage assets, poor drainage conditions that contribute to increased risk to flooding. And finally, the financial plans and the investment strategies could indicate if the funding levels and strategies are allocated to reduce these performance risks. If we've increased our pavement budget to increase the number of good quality shoulders that we have, the investment strategies could take note of that. The bridge investment strategies could note that we're improving bridges such as Brent Spence, not just to improve bridge condition, but to improve the regional performance of the entire transportation system. So this section of the report emphasizes how every section of the asset management plan could contribute to making the linkage between condition and performance. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Omar.
Thank you, Gordon. So we went through the 9 chapters of the document, but as with any good report, we have an appendix. So in this case, the appendix really provides 3 fictional chapters in terms of the transportation asset management plan for a fictional DOT or a fictional agency. Those are performance gap analysis, risk management analysis, and investment strategies. So the chapters basically illustrate how a fictional state DOT could use the report's concepts to link these 3 TAM sections to a wide array of performance objectives. Although fictional, the chapters include data taken from state DOTs, but anonymized, so you won't know which state DOT we've used, and we've mixed we mixed also the data from these DOTs. So the chapters, as I said, illustrates how the concepts that we presented in the report link these TAM sections to the performance objectives. So for example, in the gap analysis section, that section identified not only condition gaps, but also gaps in the performance of the national highway system that affect national highway system pavements and bridges, regardless of their pavement, of their physical condition. So gaps in the performance of the NHS are determined by examining the agency's performance based plans and programs and other performance efforts such as the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the State Freight Plan, the Freight Reliability Index, the CMAQ traffic congestion measures, the TISMO plan, the NHS travel time reliability measures, and so on. So the gap analysis in this case was written as though it was produced by a multidisciplinary team of people who are involved in the other performance-based plans, not just the pavement and bridge transportation asset management plan. When it came to the risk chapter, the risk analysis is written as though it was developed by this fictional state DOT that identifies condition risk that could affect performance. The risk register basically included threats not only to achieving the condition targets, but also how those threats could harm system performance. For example, a large amount of bridge area that is scour critical represents a risk to statewide resilience. Lack of a culvert inventory will create a risk to maintaining roadways to be resilient during storm events, or risk of violating water quality standards. Declining pavement condition could result in a lower skid resistance that could contribute to crashes. So that's how that risk chapter was written. The last fictional chapter is about investment strategies. And in this case, the investment strategies in the fictional TAM specifically state how they support achieving asset condition targets as well as supporting overall system performance. For example, the bridge investment strategy notes that funding levels are intended to achieve condition targets, but also to make bridges resilient and to support future freight mobility. The pavement investment strategy was identified specifically to support the strategic highway safety plan's effort to enhance pavement friction and shoulders at high crash locations. So those really 3 fictional chapters provide a way for the readers and the state DOTs who are trying to take these concepts. How do we really implement these concepts in terms of state of good repair of pavement and bridge has an impact on system performance? So to summarize, this report basically included several important themes. We focus on 3 of those in terms of good pavement and bridge condition contributes to overall transportation system performance. And we talked about examples in terms of safety, in terms of freight mobility, in terms of resilience, in terms of quality of life. The second one is DOTs define their own state of good repair, and that definition of a state of good repair can be broader than only pavement surface condition or bridge component condition. A state DOT, a metropolitan planning organization, could define its state of good repair to include system performance elements. And then the last theme is a TAM development process can be the vehicle to coordinate cross-cutting analysis to link condition and performance objectives throughout the agency. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Joe for closing.
All right, thanks, Omar. Thanks, Gordon Shobna, for everything you shared with us today. So we threw a lot at you today. So we hope you got a lot out of this. But if you want to take a deeper dive into the publication, I put the link to that in the chat box, as well as the link to the Asset Management for Operations website as well. So you can feel free to click on that and bookmark it whenever you can. Shobna put a link to a couple more documents, as she mentioned, the applying asset management to signals and ITS. That's also on our website as well. So, but the links are right there, just so you know. So that wraps up our portion of the presentation. So again, we hope you got a lot out of it, and that was pretty insightful. So we're hoping, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, that this really helps facilitate the conversation when it comes time to update the TAMs again. I believe that's in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. It's hard to believe we're in 2024 right now, but it's 2026. I'm sure it's going to be honest before we know it. So we're happy that we're able to get this out now, so we can at least start planting the seeds. So with that, I believe we can, it's time for the Q&A portion of the webinar, so I can turn it back over to our host.
All right. Thank you, Joe. And thank you to all of our presenters for sharing your knowledge on this topic. So for the Q&A part, if any of the participants in this webinar have a question, you can put it into the chat and we can go through that. You can also raise your hand and I can call on you, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. All of those options are good. Since I don't see anything at the moment, I had a couple that I had, so I'll get started with those, and maybe that will prompt others to ask their questions. So, so one question I had was, you know, why did you pick the topics that you wanted to relate the asset condition performance for the system performance? So you had mentioned safety, freight mobility, noise, and resilience. I was just curious. I mean, there are other things that you could have related it to. Why did you choose those?
Well, yeah, Yana, this is Gordon. I think when you get into the report itself, I think you will see that we do talk about broader issues. We sort of abbreviated them for today. We even talked about how you may have something that's not officially part of the planning process, say as a state resilience plan, that you may want to link into your asset management plan. Congestion management systems may be required in a TMA, but not statewide. But we talk about how you can tie that into your consideration of bridge and pavement conditions. So somewhat what we have reported today is somewhat abbreviated from some broader topics that are in the report. If you have an example, maybe if you want to raise, we could try to talk about how the report may have addressed that.
Yeah, I mean, so one was, why not passenger mobility, since you mentioned freight, and then public health would be, to me, another area where you could have made the relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, because we do have public health in there, and Chauvin had touched upon that a bit. There is a section in there, obviously, about the noise. We didn't get into emissions. I mean, that's probably one area that we could have touched upon, but we didn't. In terms of passenger mobility, and we did talk about reliability, but what we couldn't find was necessarily direct correlation between the IRI or deck sub or super condition and reliability. I mean, Omar and his staff worked really hard for that and couldn't find it. But, in terms of the adequacy of your TISMO assets and reliability, there's a direct correlation there. And the report does emphasize the strategies to try to keep your TISMO assets in good condition to enhance your reliability. And as we talked about the congestion choke points, Chauvin mentioned the 100 highest choke points on the system, for almost all system interchanges and bridges. Therefore, as we develop our life cycle plan for those bridges, we can also be considering how can we improve reliability or mobility with those investments.
Yeah, and just to follow up, Yana, is before we even started with the report, we did a huge literature review effort, because we wanted to look at aspects that are supported by research. And so that's really one of the things that we try to do, is see what is out there on either side, whether it's positive or negative, and try to document that process. So we are referring to existing literature as part of this process. So if there was not much there, we tried to kind of stay away from these areas because we didn't have any supporting documentation for it.
On the public health topic, did you guys, the area that seems promising that we could do better at is relating, especially pavements, to active transportation, and that kind of leads you a bit more to kind of urban versus rural issues, and looking geographically at the difference of different regional considerations.
Right, right.
You
No,
get
we really
into
tried to,
that?
yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we
Mhm.
really try to hit it at the life cycle planning stage because, taking a good pavement and deciding we're going to rebuild it right now to add bike lanes and whatever could be very expensive. But at the same time, we know we're periodically going to be rebuilding those sections. And what we were, urging in the report is at that intersection of when you're at that reconstruction stage is when you'd really be missing an opportunity if you didn't look at adding active transportation for all the benefits that active transportation provides, including health benefits. So we're trying to be realistic and say we may not be able to rebuild everything all at once, which we can do. But we know in good asset management, we have a periodic reconstruction phase, and that is perhaps the lowest cost opportunity to add active transportation to those urban pavements and bridges because we've already covered mobilization of the cost up front.
Thanks, Gordon. Daniel Galvis has a comment in chat. Daniel, do you want to just unmute and share it?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think my comment is related to what Omar presented related payment friction.
Mhm.
And yeah, the comment is more basically, what do states define as good, right? I put the example, if we have a payment that has low cracking, low rotting, low RRI, we will label that as a good payment based on federal metrics. But if it has poor friction, is it really a good payment, right? And I think that will apply to all the different factors that this report is highlighting, right? Like, how do we define the state of good repair? What are we considering that is good or not? I don't know if you want to comment on that or something. Yeah.
So and one of the slides, and I'll let Omar say in a minute. When one of the slides, what we talked about is that just because a particular pavement, right, meets the basic definition of, the three distresses are good, IRI is good, fretting, faulting, cracking is good, does not necessarily mean that it is actually good in the bigger context. And similarly with the bridges, because you could be having other issues with bridges besides your substructure, superstructure, and deck being good. So these are the areas that have provided an opportunity really for states to look at and say, okay, well, this is what the definition says, but FHWA has provided us the opportunity to expand our definition, right, of what is a state of good repair. And it has allowed states to go ahead and make it more expansive. Now, I say this because one of the states that we are working with, there's a lot of challenges associated with friction. And so as we move forward with that state, one of the things that the state is doing is developing its own strategy to address friction and trying to incorporate that in its next version of asset management plan to say that, yes, over and above the three distresses, depending on whether it's concrete or asphalt, we as our state is going to also include these additional factors. So that's the option to extend what we call the state of good good repair, and to incorporate all of these other aspects is what is providing states the forum to go ahead and be more expansive, and states are doing it. I don't know if that answered your question, Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel, thank you. Thank you for the comment. I think it's definitely valid. I mean, the thing though is federal highway these are reporting requirements that are the standards, but federal highway did not really prescribe how the agencies would take care of those assets. So even though we're reporting that this is a good pavement from a pavement physical condition, we can manage that pavement or that asset from also a system performance perspective, which would include safety, which would include resilience. So fully agree with your comment in terms of how we should be looking holistically at our conditions, not just from the physical perspective, but from the operation and system performance perspective. But the good thing is the state DOTs have flexibility in defining their state of good repair and also in making investment decisions to manage those assets.
So in the chapter presentations, especially in chapter 9, I was curious if you noticed any pattern of where agencies had their TAM responsibility, whether you're more likely to see agencies making this connection between asset management and system performance, if they were, in the executive office or planning versus engineering or maintenance.
That's
I'm-
so.
Good, Julie.
We found it varying, honestly, Hannah. So different states have different areas that are managed this holistically. Some states have it in pavement area, some states have it in planning, some states even have it in maintenance. So one of the things, and what I wanted to draw your attention to is FHWA has another series of workshops and webinars and seminars that talk about this, how to bring together all of these factors, asset management for pavements and bridges, but also think about the national goals and how planning, programming across these different assets and across these different areas can come together to really make a big difference. So so to your point, it's varying where the responsibility lies, but through this particular workshop which we have already reached out to 2 states, I believe, no, 1 state, 2 states, and are going to be reaching out to many more. The idea is to really coalesce behind the idea that you really need to have an approach that is more holistic. So just having somebody in the asset management area working on just pavements and bridges, and someone in safety working on safety, and them not knowing what the others are doing, we found that to be, a lot of it was like that. So when we talk about safety, sometimes the safety folks do not have a good understanding of what is the consistency reporting, what is the mid-performance reporting, why do we have, there is sometimes a big gap between those areas. And so this particular new workshop, it's a series of reports that we had developed, the 3 of us, Omar, Gordon, and myself had developed for Tasha Clements' office. That's coming out with workshops. We're finding that that conversation is helping people understand that, yeah, in safety, I don't really understand all these aspects about what is happening in pavements and bridges, and maybe this collaboration will work. When I'm dealing with the freight plan, I'm missing out on the point that there's a bigger picture. So there is a lot of disconnect, and I think as we move forward, we are hoping that these reports, these workshops will help bring it together. So there is not one, it's not one size fits all. So there's, that's sort of our experience from working with different states.
Thanks, Shobna. Scott Zainhovsky has a comment. Do you want to just open your mic and share it?
Sure. Thank you, Yana. And thank you to the presenters. This is a very interesting report. I'm wondering if you considered managing system performance as essentially an asset class, just like you would the physical pavement and bridge conditions. So, the basic approach, set a performance measure, set your target, and then establish an investment plan kind of within a particular performance area. And it strikes me that this is probably easier given the current federal regulations than it would be to add certain elements to the definition of the state of good repair, given the federal performance measures and those kinds of things. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that approach. Thank you.
I think the simple answer is no, we didn't look at it directly, but I'd be curious to hear from Joe and Tasha about this. This is really Joe's area. But we did touch upon elements of that. The things, if you were to have a statewide resiliency plan, reliability plan, a lot of the elements in this report could contribute to it, but we did not look at reliability or mobility as an asset in itself. So Omar or Shobna, please chime in.
I
Go ahead.
Joe, you had something to say. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, just based on our experience in terms of, I guess, your question of having system performance as its own asset class. I know and Tasha can slap me on the wrist if I'm wrong, but I know with the 23 CFR definition, define an asset as having a physical component and as well. I mean, from a stricter definition, interpretation, I mean, that might not, that may not qualify. I know some state DOTs have done something similar, like highway capacity as an asset, just as to help align with their overall strategic goals in terms of advancing operations or advancing TSMO within that agency. So that's more of a, I guess, maybe an unofficial way they do it at a statewide level. So I don't know if anyone, Tasha or anyone else wants to add on to that.
We did not find any examples, Scott, but I mean, I wonder if states who are on the phone, on the webinar today, any state has any experience in moving towards in that direction, towards what Scott's saying would be a good idea. We think it's a good idea because it's much more holistic, but we haven't come across any examples to talk about it. Maybe some of the states there on the webinar might be able to share some of their experiences.
I know the closest some states have come is in terms of data and human resources, but I don't think any of that made it officially into a TAMP as an asset class. So it's an interesting approach that probably still has its limitations. One of the issues that I know, and I see Tasha has turned her camera on, so she wants to say something, but right now, if you have an asset in the transportation asset management plan, it has to follow all the requirements of the transportation asset management plan. So Tasha, you probably want to mention that better than I do.
Well, no, what you said is absolutely correct. Federal highways, again, we focus on what the requirements are, and that is payments and bridges. We do encourage our state partners to consider additional assets. But as Omar has mentioned, if states do consider it, they still have to run all of the same analysis that they would run for payments and bridges. And because of that, we have had some states that have said that they just did not have the resources to do that. It can be very expensive. So what they're doing is what's basically just required. Fortunately, unfortunately, federal highways cannot mandate that that they would consider anything outside of payments and bridges, but we do encourage it if the states would like to do that and add that to the asset management plans.
To add to what Tasha just mentioned, we found that the reason I asked if states have experienced that is because we found about 40% of the states in their 2032 asset management plans have included a lot of other assets. So in the context of moving towards in that direction of including more assets, which basically means you're going to have an asset management planning process, but there's nothing that's requiring you, as Tasha said, to, there's no performance measures or anything mandated, but that's moving in the direction of states trying to incorporate more assets. But back to Scott's point about a system performance approach, we've yet to see that, but I think it's a great idea because, more holistic.
Well, I think that it reminds me of the early discussions when MAP 21 or pre-MAP 21, when there was the discussion of is asset management scope broader than just assets, and that it's a way of management that looks holistically at the transportation system. So it would, if it's really a definition of how do you scope asset management in your agency? And from what I'm hearing from the group here, you're not saying that the rules preclude you from looking at asset management as broader than physical assets. So it can be done.
It definitely
right.
can be done.
Huh?
It definitely can be done.
Yeah, I think Steve Gay, I remember in those days, was very much an advocate for the broader view of asset management. All right, so, well, thank you, everyone. And this has been a terrific webinar. And Our next webinar will be on April 17th, a Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the topic will be on equity and transportation asset management. The rest of the Federal Highways and AASHTO leadership has decided that the rest of this year's webinar series is going to focus on the survey results. Many of you filled out the survey that was sent out by Matt Hobrecht and Emily Burns and Laura Zale. It was out of the kind of the TAM conference pooled fund. And in it, there were questions about where you have knowledge, where you want more knowledge, and then for people to share examples of insights as well as practice. And so there was a richness of input, and we'll use that to shape the series. And so equity is going to be the first one up in terms of the topics that that was included in the survey. All right, so if you have other ideas, there will, there's opportunity for a special series. In fact, there's another mini series that's being planned from a asset management case studies project that Federal Highways is supporting. And so please share that with us. And so thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. And please go visit tam-portal.com. And thank you again to all of our presenters today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.